Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first real official episode of The Brew. With me is my co-host, one of my two co-hosts. The other co-host may be here a little bit later today. Otherwise, he's going to join us next week. But I've got Raphael Ray with us from the other side of the pond, and here in Susquehanna, along the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. For those who don't know me, I'm Gianmichael Salvato, and I am just thrilled to see that we've got so many comments that are coming in already. Patrick just said, I'm sure you all have some idea of what it's like being a solitaire practitioner. I'm excited to be part of something like this. Patrick, we love your feedback, and we're going to talk about that actually today. Eugene, thank you, brother. Glad to see that you're here. And Anthony, glad to see that you're here as well. If you're tuning in for the first time, please know that I am doing. Oh, wow, it's awesome. I'm doing everything I possibly can to get to everybody in the comments. We were just talking before we got started about how. Non-techie and I don't chew gum and walk at the same time. So thanks for bearing with us, because this is really something. What I think I'd love to do, whether Vit Keeble is able to join us today or not, we'll definitely hear from him when he gets here. But the sort of the core thing that brought us together as a group of pagan LGBTQ men was this sense of the divisiveness, the witch wars, the anti-heathen or the anti-witch sentiments, and more that we'll talk about each personally. And Raphael and I first started this conversation a while back, and really connected. And so what I thought we would do today is start off giving everybody a sense of what our traditions are. You saw my sort of playful take on this, that a heathen, a witch, and a warlock walked into the bar. So it sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it really is what brought us together. So today, let's start off, Raphael, if you wouldn't mind, by sharing a little bit about your journey, what your tradition is. I'll try and keep an eye on the questions as they're. I'll scroll through the questions while you're talking, while listening to you, and see if there's any questions that come up. And guys, just go ahead and drop a comment. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you have comments or questions, we want you to be part of this conversation as well. So take it away, Raphael.
Awesome. So some of you might know me from Radiant Reality. That is kind of how I kind of got myself out there. In terms of my tradition, so at the moment, I would call myself just that one word, witch. I kind of sit with that. Getting myself to that place was an interesting journey. I think a lot of us, especially in the community, come to spirituality through anything and everything that offers us some kind of acceptance. So you take it back right to when you're a teenager, you kind of go into this broad spirituality, and you start to attach yourself to labels because they seem to be all encompassing. I did the whole Wiccan thing and tried to get in line with that, but again, it really didn't fit. And then slowly but surely, I started to learn and understand the difference between Wiccans, witches, pagans, and what all the different paths, let's say. So I started that journey years ago. I'm 33 now, about to be 34, just around the corner. For me, this journey started around 12, 13. I went to Catholic school, so you can imagine. And not long after 12, 13 of realizing that kind of aspect of religion and spirituality just didn't speak to me. And it actually felt not just divisive, it actually felt oppressive. And I really started to look at, that and say, well, that doesn't, I don't identify with that. And, you start to pick holes in some of the things that you're taught. And I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me. So I started checking libraries out. And I was quite fortunate actually to, hear whispers around the school of different people that were into different religions and different paths. And I crossed paths with a lady who decided to teach me about the craft. She gave me different perspectives on things and different understandings. And one of the things that I will always love about her is she said to me, do your research, get a sense of what really speaks to you and what really doesn't. And that's how I evolved past Wicca in the end, because I was like, okay, there's something more primal behind this. Wicca it's a beautiful religion. It's got so much spirituality to it. But for me, it felt like I needed something that was more rooted in the primal aspects of the energies of the earth, right? And that's when I started to branch out and look more into, the older paganism, the older ancient laws, and all of those understandings on that path. How I came to understand that the word witch and Wiccan, although in the media they seem to be synonymous, right? It's like if you're one, then you're the other, and that's not necessarily the case. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, to be fair. And obviously along that path, the tarot and astrology and numerology have been massive parts of my growth spurt, I would suppose you could call it.
Awesome. Well, I've had the opportunity, as I think many who are here, and again, welcome to everybody who's watching us for the first time. I've had that opportunity to, sort of see you in action, to watch your tarot readings. At the end of the show, we will go ahead and put in the comments ways that you can connect with us personally, with our YouTube channels and things like that. And then in post-production, on YouTube, you'll be able to see the replays of these programs as well. And on that post-production version, our URLs will be at the very end of each of the programs. But thank you for sharing that, Raphael. And some of the questions that have come through, we're going to get to you, Eugene, particularly yours. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I thought I'd share just sort of a nutshell version of mine, because a few questions that came before the show were asking me what did I mean when I said that there was going to be a Norse pagan or a shaman, a witch, and a warlock, and somebody said, "Oh, please tell me you're not going to go down that road of using Sabrina-esque titles." And so I loved the comment. I love the fact that I got it. First of all, those who know me know that I, as an autistic man, I love pushing buttons. So I felt like I accomplished one thing by pushing the buttons there. But what I meant when I put that, there was also a bit of seriousness there, because my tradition comes from, I've been practicing since I was 6 years old. I come from the Streghe tradition, a hereditary tradition in Italian and Etruscan spirituality. And so our family's lineage of practice dates back incredibly far. I hesitate to say how far, because it's hard when you get earlier than 200 years before the Common Era. It's really hard to know what is mythology and legend and folklore and what is historical. So just suffice to say, it was a very heavily rooted tradition in our family. And so that was
so lucky. I think it's beautiful.
I consider myself really, really fortunate, and I'm really grateful for that. And that's an important part of who I am. It informs who I am. But as I began to grow older, as a gay man and as a non-binary person, I also started to feel that there was a need or a connection, a greater connection, I should say, to what I call my tribe, which are the community that all of us are a part of, or else you probably wouldn't have heard of this show. And so that connection caused me to see some of the needs, some of the some of the dangers of some people trying to getting into practices, dabbling without somebody guiding them or mentoring them. It made me see the lines drawn in the sand, and compassion compelled me to be there. And for me, I guess there was a little bit of a personal connection to that, because in 1983, on May 10th of 1983, as many of you have heard this story, I was raped and beaten at gunpoint by four guys, straight guys in South Florida, who just beat me to a pulp. And they put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger, and that gun misfired. And when that gun misfired, I had an experience of I can't call it anything other than a companionship with someone or something, or an archetype from within that was unfamiliar to me in my path. It was not from the pantheon that I was familiar with. And so it wasn't an archetype that I could say, aha, this is coming from within me as so-and-so. And as I explained it to a friend of mine who was a pagan practitioner, he said, oh, well, that's just bullshit, because you are you're from an Italian tradition, and what you just described to me is a god from my tradition. And I'm not going to call him out. I'm not going to say what tradition and so forth. But he said, essentially, you can't have had that experience, because that would be cultural appropriation. And you're not. I am going to call that. You're not. Yeah, you're not a Norse practitioner, so you can't have had an experience of Odin protecting you. Well, I couldn't understand why, but it just let me know that there were people who were very protective of their traditions, and those lines drawn in the sand are so divisive. They're so destructive, and they have an energetic blowback on the person who's drawing those lines. And that's, go ahead, well, jump in, because this is a
do you know what, I totally hear you, and I totally resonate with you. The thing about being protective about your tradition is it's a beautiful ideal when it's not destructive or divisive, right? And I totally get it. Like with some people, it's all about paying your dues. And when I say paying your dues, it's not about fun or anything like that. It's about doing the work, the preparation to call yourself a whatever title or label you identify with. Like you've got, the whole thing about the mystery traditions in their real heritage was that you went through a specific process to get to certain feelings, to certain levels, to certain connections to what we call the deities, the source, right? So that part of it is important. However, when you have an experience like that is so traumatic, that is so beyond really human, let's be honest, right? It's dark. To have something like that happen to you is extremely dark, and you come very close to to death, effectively, where you're ready or about to cross over. The fact that you were able to bypass all of those steps in the tradition and go straight to it was something else from the other, as I would call it, on the other side, reaching out to say, no, you're not alone. Yes, you are protected. And, the universe is, I've heard this said by an astrologer, and I think she's brilliant. She said the universe is loving and wise. That people's actions aren't so means that the universe has to step in. So the fact that you had that experience didn't need to have anything to do with tradition. That was the spirit of the all reaching out to you in supreme love and supreme harmony. How dare somebody try to take that from you because of what your tradition is or isn't? Sorry, really.
No, that's really. That's what we're here to do. When Eugene commented as you were speaking, what people fail to understand is that our traditions have these root ideas that a person can't tap into and experience because of that person's background. It's one primary reason why people feel they can't express themselves, because of fear of another saying you can't do this because you're from this place. And absolutely right. I would have put that up on the screen, Eugene, but it won't fit. And another comment that we had before was somebody who said, well, I probably wouldn't be welcome on your show because I come from a Christian tradition, a Christian background. And so I want to just real quickly touch on that because you are absolutely welcome to be on this show. Somebody said, well, you seem like you're a little hostile toward Christianity. I've read your Facebook wall. And so as we start this program, I want to be really clear about that too. First of all, if I've ever made anyone feel that simply because your path is a Christian path, that you are invalid or that your spiritual tradition is rubbish, please know that that's not my intention, sincerely. I actually, as part of the Streghe tradition, as I evolved and grew as an adult, there is a Streghe, a witchcraft tradition within the Catholic tradition and the esoteric Catholic tradition. I was part of that. I was initiated through that. I was a priest and an archbishop in that tradition. So I understand where you're coming from. Now, I can tell you right now that I don't embrace most of where that tradition is coming from, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. It doesn't mean that it's not right. But what we are here on this show, and Raphael, if I'm speaking out of turn, stop me and correct me. But I think for all of us that are here, what brings us together by any name, I don't care whether you call it Odin or Kali or the Mother Diana, whatever name you call it, or God or Yahweh or whatever, Lucifer, Satan, as long as what is at the core of your being is love, what is at the central of your tradition is love, we honor that. And we're coming together because that power, that essence, that part of who we are, and that even includes those who, like myself, are not personally theistic. Don't embrace the deities as being separate from themselves. So a non-dualist like me would say, that essence within myself can be reflected into the world in ways that it helps. It would be useless if what I hold inside me has no value to any of you. So it is unrelatable. So if what I have in me as love, that pure awareness and that pure compassion reflects out into the world, and somebody walking down the street says that person reflects the love of God, I'm fine with that. Then my job has been done. But when your religion brings in that divisiveness, when it says you don't have a right to love who you want to love, you don't have a right to be true to yourself and express your gender as was intended in your own heart, in your own life. When it says you don't have a right to marry, you don't have a right to do this, you don't have a right to equal pay because you're a female or because you're transgender or because you're gay or whatever those bullshit stories are, that's what we confront. It's not the spiritual tradition itself. It's the people, just like within our own traditions and the pagan traditions, who deviate from that norm. Because at the end of the day, there would be no Christianity if there weren't paganism, because it's a retelling and a repackaging of the stories that have been told in our traditions for over 5,000 years.
Yes,
Go ahead, jump in.
therein lie you've just said one of the brilliant things that I wanted to open up some kind of dialogue story, right? When we talk about the myths, the old heroes, the old gods, the old deities, the old archetypes, all of these things as we know them today are streamlined versions of much older myths and archetypes that came from all of our ancestors back. If you went back maybe 20, 30 generations, there probably were a lot less lines in the sand than we had today. They didn't need labels. They didn't need any of that because it was unimportant. I think as we move towards, the modern era, things started to be pigeonholed and had to be this and had to be that. And that's where you start. And that are repackaged and retold, like you said, those are the myths. And the sad part about it for me is those myths are what make us immortal. You know, those things that we
Right
all
on.
identify with. Yeah, whether it's your Harry Potter or your Hercules, whether it is your oh gosh, give me some really, you know, some much older ones. They're all the same. Yeah, all of those feelings that it excites within you means that some part of you understands that even if it may be a myth and a story, there is some common bond between us as people, us as beings, and whatever it is that is all encompassing above us. So
Right
those
on.
stories, they're so important because they're all of our myths. That's what we share as I got goosebumps right now as I'm talking about this. You know, those things are the things that we share, and those are the ways that we are going to live forever, right? And that is vitally important.
Absolutely, and I want to go ahead and share something that Cleveland Goodshield shared, and then we're going to get to Eugene's question. Cleveland writes, "I grew up in a Christian belief, but went into Hebrew beliefs, yet it still wasn't helping me spiritually. Wicca made sense to me, and so did the Lakota beliefs, which I am so close to personally, as he's a member of the Lakota Nation. I am learning and I am growing. I do call myself a witch, but I don't label myself which religion I belong to. Have you ever been there where you feel like you have to be in some form of religion, but not spiritually based? Just wondering. I'm a witch. That's it." And so I'd like to first comment on this, and then have Raphael comment, so that we can get on to Eugene's question, which dovetails perfectly into this. I fully appreciate and resonate with your question, in that I don't personally feel like I belong to a religion. Streghe is often called by modernists, is often called the old religion. And yet I know from my tradition that it never had anything to do with religion, but that in the 20th century, we started to see some syncretism coming in there, where we would sort of hide who we are. That's how we ended up with a lineage that goes into the Catholic, esoteric Catholic tradition, because like Santeria, like Yoruba, we would sort of hide our deities and our practices behind the statues that came from the Holy Roman Empire's version of paganism, which is known as Catholicism. And so, yeah, so I personally don't subscribe to the notion of a religion, because I don't feel that I need to be. I feel like personally, I dance on the fringes. The reason I use the term warlock in the teaser for today's show was because when I decided to become part of this movement and really focus my energies and my work on my tribe, I was considered to be breaking the oath that I made to never talk about our tradition outside the family. So I am an oath breaker. An oath breaker is called a warlock. In our tradition, that's not as bad as, say, and I wish our brother was able to be here today, as bad as, say, Loki, who is an oath breaker, but is detested, and so much so that real authentic Norse pagans don't even speak his name. They it's not like we saw on television on Thor and all of those shows. And so again, I think to Cleveland's question, the reason that we find people saying, well, you have to adapt or adopt a religion of preference, is that the ideas that we're drawing, especially some of the younger pagans and younger witches coming to the table, they're drawing them on television, on AHS or True Blood or Sabrina. And while I'm going to tell you, full disclosure, I love those programs, they do miss the mark on a lot of the important things. I watched Sabrina last season, and at one point, I almost jumped out of we have a little group that watches it together. I almost jumped out of my chair because they were actually speaking the words that are supposed to be secret from my tradition, and doing it accurately, and doing it they did an amazing job of a particular Streghe ritual. So I know somebody in that writers cast has some background there. So and that just kind of excited me. But then, you know, you have the Hail Satan and all the other craziness where they're really just kind of, it's entertainment. They want to kind of make you chuckle when you see pagans behaving the way that fundamentalist Christians behave. And to me, like, that was the takeaway from that show. Was a great takeaway. I know I'm going to get some hate mail for having said
no. And you know, the fact that you said it, I was like, oh, that's tasty. That's going to get some. Going to get some backs up. But you know what? It's really interesting that you mentioned that. And to go back to this whole thing with the Christianity, within my family, on my mum's side, they're Greek Orthodox. As well as Catholic, as well as some born-again Christians. It's a whole mix, right? I am effectively, literally the black sheep of the family in so many respects. I'm proud to be so as well. But, you know, it's not about excluding anybody or saying, oh, because you're a Christian or you identify with that, you don't belong. Actually, when you look into some of the Christian mysticism, it's beautiful and it's rich, and it actually allows for so much more than the dogma, real word of religion. You know, and when I talk about that, it comes from relegare, doesn't it? To hold back, right? So in its very name, it kind of suggests that it is there for some sort of control or power seeking. However, if you identify as a Christian and you are spiritually minded and you feel, you know, akin to everybody around you, or color or shape or form or sexuality they take, how can I exclude you from what I'm doing? That, you know, just by that association, we already have a kinship. If you're watching this and you're a Christian or you're a Catholic and you identify with those because you need to, or you've grown as that, you are here for a reason. You came to connect with us. Your energy is reaching out to our energy, and the fact that we're connecting in this way is absolutely excluding you at all. I think it's more about the, like you said, the fundamentalist stuff. That is, it's really important to break that, because it is a chain on all of humanity and it's divisive by its very nature. And, you know, to go into it even further, if you want to talk about what I was saying earlier about the myths and, you know, the stories that we tell, when you hear about the myths of Jesus, like the thoughts of, you know, love thy brother, honor thy woman, all of that sort of stuff, those are really beautiful messages. Where they come from, or what your color of religion looks like, is really unimportant. Your deepest core message and where you're coming from with it, that is what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, you know, I think there's a certain type of person, and I think I find a lot more of them within the pagan tradition than I find within the Christian tradition. But people who I adore myths. I love the mythology. People think when I refer to the Rabbi Jesus mythology as a mythology, think that I'm disparaging them. I'm not disparaging them at all. I believe that's a beautiful repackaging and retelling of some older, you know, Egyptian astrological stories that have value. And in the Hebrew tradition, in the Jewish tradition, they actually have a word for that. It's called midrash. It's the stories that we tell. Like they consider all of what Christians would call the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, to be midrashic tales, not meant to be taken as being literal. And then we have, you know, the other layers on top of that where you could say, well, were some of these gods, these people that were perceived to be beings that created the earth, were some of them of extraterrestrial you know, nature? Were they visitors from another planet or another plane, as I believe? So some of the stories of Krishna and Shiva and some of the other creation myths, Zeus and there's such a familiar and repetitive motif in these stories that you have to believe that they are mythos. And that, you know, everybody's mythos is going to be a little bit different. And if it informs you, if it inspires you to take care of yourself and one another, then how could it be bad? So I want to jump in to Eugene's. Were you just testifying, or
yeah, I was just like, yeah, absolutely, I'm right there with you. Like, preach,
right
brother.
Right on. Eugene says, how do you best handle people who make claims of power that you feel is backed by ego, and how would you go about that situation? And I'm going to go ahead and hand that off to you. I'm going to leave it up on the screen for a second, but you're hidden by the window, so I'm going to take it back down and turn that over to you, brother.
To me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So firstly, call them out on it. You know, and I say that like it's easy. Sometimes it isn't, given, you know, the situation or the people that you might be surrounded by. You know, especially if you are that one voice in the crowd that is questioning what is kind of effectively being shoved down your throat. You know, and in terms of that, I think, not even think, slowly but surely we're stepping away from this having a guru or somebody that we all kind of divert energy and power and, you know, relinquish all of our own gifts to. And it's interesting because we've just had this lunar eclipse that took place in Leo, right? And Leo is about the self, but it's about the self through the heart space. And one of the messages that I put out on that day on my YouTube channel was about trusting yourself. If you know deep in yourself, in your heart, that what somebody is saying to you or preaching to you isn't right for you, it doesn't resonate for you, and it actually feels like a play, your safest bet is to disentangle yourself from that as soon as possible. And if you can, call them out on it. And the reaction that you get will very often tell you whether you're in good hands or not. If somebody's doing that and they're doing it unconsciously, when you point it out, the tendency would be for them to say, oh, wow, okay, so I'll have to look at that. If they can't do that, then, you know, you're probably looking at somebody that's trying to keep, although I think Aladdin said it best, phenomenal cosmic power all to themselves. You know, we're all here to lead in some way, shape or form, and we all have a message to deliver to humanity. I think when you start getting into places that are forcing the herd mentality on you, that's when you've got a problem.
Well, so well put. I really don't have very much to add to that, other than just to kind of suggest that when you're calling someone out, I find a much more effective way of doing that than just flat out. And I always have to remind myself of this, again, because the autism has taken every semblance of filter out of my experience. But I find it's more effective to ask questions than to just say, I'm going to call bullshit on that. So ask questions so that person will, out of that discomfort of realizing that somebody might have just caught them on their bullshit, will soften some of their claims initially. And then I find that as you talk about them more and more, you could maybe say something, and it doesn't always go well. I'm not going to pretend that it does, but you could say something like, I found that it's less helpful in my experience to talk about what we can do, and it puts you at risk. Because that, at the end of the day, the reason we call someone out isn't, you know, at least in my experience, isn't because we personally are disturbed, that our peace is disturbed by somebody's bullshit. It's out of a real concern that when somebody does that, they're setting themselves up for issues. When somebody, even from my perspective, when somebody shares a spell beyond a positive, affirmative, new moon ritual or something like that, when they're sharing a spell publicly, not just between two people, they open themselves up to risk. I want everyone thinking about that, as not that I see a lot of people in this group that are watching right now do it, but if you were doing some serious ritual work, if your practice is very serious for you, think about the fact that if you write down what your spell is, and a classic example are those pagans around the world who are doing ritual work to disempower and rid us of the scourge that is the Trump-Russia influence in the United States. If we write down what it is that we're saying, then you're giving your spell to someone who may want to counter that, who may want to use your own words against you, who may have a greater sense of awareness, intention, and energy behind their doing something that may harm you. Now that's just that one example, but that can happen in anything. That can happen any kind of ritual work you do. It goes hand in hand with the post that Cleveland posted earlier today, saying that when he goes out and feeds the homeless or brings blankets to the cold on the streets, he doesn't post photos of himself doing it, because it's not about him, it's about them. And so consider your spiritual practice number one, first and foremost in that, and be guarded about that. It's one thing to be in a group where we encourage one another and we share what we did. But if you find there are certain groups I will never talk about my practice in, because I've been attacked. And I can't be bothered with having to fend off an attack that was unnecessary because I invited it in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things as well, I've seen in some things, certain people will post and they'll say things like, "Oh, can somebody give me a curse?" And I always say to people, it's totally up to you what you do with your time, with your energy. Firstly, remember that anything that you write down, you're already setting an intention, right? If you're writing it down, even if it is over the airwaves, you're already sending some kind of energy out. Second, if that person takes your work, your writing, your energy, your spell, your ritual, and their intention is impure, as in it's just because they wanted something that somebody else got, or and we have to be careful, because then we get into the whole law of congruency and what was deserved and not. But to keep it pure and simple, if somebody does something with that hex or that curse that you write down that was unwarranted, the fact that you've put it out there, you may not have done the ritual for them against somebody else, but your energy is directly involved because you gave them the effective gun to go out and shoot somebody. And it really is that same kind of energy behind it. So always be careful about the type of work that you share with people. I've had people ask that, and even say, like, "Are you sure you want to be, putting your name to something like that?" Before you just start saying, "Yeah, well, you do this and you get that, and put it all together and say these words." That's a really path forward.
That was phenomenal. That's going to be something I rewind and listen to again, because there was such clarity in there, and it's the perfect segue into sort of wrapping up. We try to keep these to 45 minutes to an hour, this program, so that we can have the attention span, first of all, of the 21st century players. But one of the things I'm going to share, and I want to get Raphael's URL up on the screen in a minute. But there is a group that we're starting, not to compete with any Facebook groups. This is more of like a movement, and we want to include all the Facebook groups. We want to create, as Katrina just mentioned herself, a safe space for this ongoing conversation. Real food for the soul, real substance, where we're not afraid to step on some toes or to be inappropriate at times, and have fun with this, because spirituality that has no joy, no fun, no passion in it is such a fucking waste of time. And so the group that we're putting together, and it's in its infancy stages, this is the seeds of that group, will be able to be found on my website, which is inneralchemy.online. There is no .com on that or .net. It's inneralchemy.online. And Raphael, your website is Radiant Ray, REY.
It's Radiant Reality. So spell REYDIANT, reality.
All one word.
And you can read. Yeah, all one word.
.com.
And yeah.
Okay, let me put one.
And yeah, if any of you would like to, you can also check me out under the same name on YouTube. Radiant Reality is my channel name.
Yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend that. Some of the best. I can't tell you how many people I turn on to your channel. Some of the best.
Thank you.
Combination of astrology and tarot in readings that are accurate. I mean, the real test is
Humbled.
meeting the statements with reality, with what happens, with what transpires, with what you feel, and you certainly stand up to that test. And on behalf of Vicky Bull, who just sent me a message and said that an emergency came up right before we went on the air that he needed to attend to. And we are certainly about first things first. Family comes first, loved ones come first, those sorts of emergencies where we put our spirituality into practice. If you would like to really hear more about another part that was the essential focus of today's program was going to be about these lines that are drawn in the sand, especially between the Norse pagan community and the witches community, and how absolutely horrid those are. And for anybody who follows a pagan tradition, I would strongly suggest if you've been somebody who said, I've had bad experiences with the Norse pagans, because you had probably bad experiences with the Norse pagan group, which may or may not have been more influenced by the movies than it was by the actual traditions. I would encourage you to understand that historically, the Vikings have fought alongside other pagan traditions to fight off oppression from the Roman Empire, oppression from religious persecution, oppression from so many things. They have fought by our sides, and they didn't fight for themselves, because in their tradition insulates itself in a smart and perfect way from attack. They could have just stayed by themselves, but they are the brothers and sisters who have fought by our sides. And I think that at a time like this, when there's so much persecution against them, it's incumbent upon us to be willing to stand by their sides as well, because now they're starting to see some of that infighting that the witches community has experienced now since almost since the time of Gardner. That is just unnecessary. We want this to be a safe space. We want this to be a place where we bring people together, not divide people, where we support and lift one another up, and where we become a community, truly a community of lovers, because that is what we as LGBTQ persons, are keenly, acutely aware of the pain that comes from when that's not present in our lives. And so let's bring that to our community first. And I think when we do that, then we get to expand that energy into our greater community where we live, and expand that beyond that into the cosmos. So my brother Raphael, I am so grateful for you being here. I just can't tell you how exciting in every fiber of my being this program was, especially having the presence and participation of all of you folks who've tuned in and watched live, as well as the folks who I know will be watching on the rebroadcast. So thank you, my brother, and thank you, viewers.
Thank you so much.
You, this would just be a dress rehearsal. So you guys made it real. And if you'd like to be on the program, we have with this platform we use, there are 4 seats available. So with the 3 pagan guys, we all, have the opportunity for somebody who, if you have something you would like to share, if you have something you would like to ask questions live and be on camera, we would absolutely adore that. So just reach out to any of us and let us know. And in the comments below, I know when Raphael hangs up, he will put his contact info for his website and his YouTube channel in there. I will go ahead and do the same thing. And then we'll look forward to seeing you guys next week at 3 o'clock Eastern time, 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, noon Pacific, and you're on your own to figure out all the other time zones in between there. Anything you want to say?
For all those that turn up, yeah, for all those that are here, that were with us watching, for all those that come after and watch after the show, thank you so much for all of your love, your patience, your support. It really means a lot, and I really hope that we can continue to grow this community. I was really nervous before this show, and I feel totally really look forward to the next one.
Yes, right on. All right, everybody. Namaste. Be well. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.